Good morning and welcome to the Political Correction on GB News. Lots of exciting content coming up today, but first let's go over to the news.
Good morning, I'm Olivia Guthrie. This is your news at 10 o'clock. The Education Secretary has become the first government minister to back reducing the isolation period from 7 to 5 days. Nadeem Sahawi says he'll be led by the UK Health Security Agency on the matter, but he thinks it would be helpful for teaching staff shortages if it did decide to cut the isolation time down for those who test positive with COVID. A group of MPs is calling on the Attorney-General to refer the Colston statue case to the Court of Appeal. A jury cleared 4 protesters of criminal damage after the monument was pulled down and thrown into the harbour in Bristol in 2020. In a letter to Suella Braverman, the Tory Common Sense group says the verdict was patently absurd and needs urgent review. Political commentator Connor Tomlinson says the jury's decision cannot be challenged.
There is no legal precedent set, so it's going to be quite a difficult thing to take this to the Court of Appeals and get this somehow arbitrated. The only problem is, I think it's sitting uncomfortable with a lot of people that there are 11-to-1 majority in a town in this country where they throw out the English way of doing things, which is by the book, by legal precedent, and you don't go around destroying other people's property, public or private, just because you're upset about something.
Boris Johnson's being warned not to scale back free lateral flow tests following reports they could be limited to high-risk settings. Scotland's First Minister Nicola Sturgeon and the Labour Party say it would be utterly wrong-headed to do so. Meanwhile, the UK has reached a total COVID-related death toll of more than 150,000 since the pandemic began. The Foreign Secretary says she's prepared to override unilaterally parts of the post-Brexit agreement on Northern Ireland if negotiations fail. Writing in the Sunday Telegraph, Liz Truss warns she's willing to trigger Article 16, which would suspend parts of the treaty designed to prevent a hard border with the Republic. She's meeting her EU counterpart this week for face-to-face talks. Australian authorities are finalising a legal defence explaining their decision to bar entry to Novak Djokovic over his COVID vaccination status. The world's top-ranked tennis player is spending a 4th day in immigration detention centre ahead of a court case tomorrow. He landed in Melbourne this week to play in the Australian Open. Player Renata Vorakova from the Czech Republic has now left the country after having her visa cancelled. At least 7 people have been killed after part of a cliff collapsed onto leisure boats near a waterfall on a Brazilian lake. 3 people are still missing and 32 others injured following the accident yesterday in the southeast of the country. The Brazilian Navy, which helped in the rescue, said it would investigate the causes of the accident. The biggest ever space telescope mirror has now moved into place and could soon explore the depths of the universe.
We have a fully deployed JWST observatory.
All right. Yes.
Engineers from NASA and the European Space Agency celebrated as its 18 hexagonal segments straightened out into its full shape. The last part of the James Webb Space Telescope mirror was launched by rocket on Christmas Day. NASA scientist Jane Rigby says it'll take a while to decipher the first images.
I like to think of it as it's like we have 18 mirrors that are right now little prima donnas all doing their own thing, singing their own tune in whatever key they're in, and we have to make them work like a chorus. And that is a methodical, laborious process. We want to make sure that the first images that the world sees, that humanity sees from this telescope, do justice to this $10 billion telescope and are not those, hey, look, a star.
And the Duchess of Cambridge has released 3 new portraits to mark turning 40 today. Fashion photographer Paolo Roversi took the birthday pictures, which show Kate in a series of Alexander McQueen dresses with her hair flowing. She's also wearing a pair of earrings that once belonged to her mother-in-law, Diana, Princess of Wales. It's 4 minutes past 10. I'll have more in an hour. Now it's back to the political correction.
Good morning, you're watching GB News and this is The Political Correction. I'm Deanna Davison and joining me today is Arlene Foster and Paul Embry. Coming up this hour, the JCVI has advised the government against giving a fourth jab to care home residents and those aged over 80. But does this leave the vulnerable still at risk? Labour MP Jack Dromey died suddenly in his flat in his Birmingham constituency on Friday. We pay tribute to him this morning in We Work For You. And what are the annoying phrases you would like politicians to stop using? We've got a few examples, but we want to hear from you. You can get involved in the entire conversation today by emailing us on gbviews@gbnews.uk or tweeting us at gbnews. This is The Political Correction. Now, according to new figures, vaccine boosters are 90% effective in stopping people going to hospital who are over the age of 65. Despite this, the JCVI has advised the government against giving a fourth jab to care home residents and those aged over 80. Is this good news, or are you still concerned about your loved one's safety? Arlene, I'm going to come to you first on this. Booster jabs seem to be a great way to give people that extra layer of protection, but do you think it's the right thing that we don't give out a fourth booster?
Well, clearly I'm not going to second guess the JCVI, Deanna, because they have been advising governments right throughout this process, and I think that they have looked at the efficacy of the third booster and have decided that there's no need to have a fourth booster. I think that would be generally welcomed by the population, because a lot of people thought we were going to be in boosterism for the next number of years. So the fact that they've said that they don't think there's a need for that, I think will be warmly welcomed by people right across the UK.
Mm-hmm. And Paul, what's your stance on this? Because we've had discussion already on the show in the past about getting vaccines out to other nations, some of those who perhaps haven't been as quick off the mark, some of those poorer nations around the world. Do you think that these two kind of go hand in hand?
To a certain degree. I mean, the question I would ask is, and Arlene touched on it, where does the whole thing end? You know, are we saying that we are going to potentially have boosters every 6 months, and if you don't have the latest booster, you're regarded as not fully vaccinated, with all of the impingements on your own freedoms and ability to travel abroad, etc. So, you know, if we are saying that we're going to have to wait for some kind of blockbuster vaccine, which is going to clear this whole thing up, and only then will we be back to normal, then that would concern me. I mean, you do obviously have to follow the science on these things. And if the experts in this case are saying, look, it's not absolutely necessary at the moment, even for the most vulnerable, to have a fourth booster, then, you know, who are we to suggest that they're wrong on that? I mean, I have to say, I think that is in many respects an important point, because some of us argued at the very outset there should be a more targeted approach to this, actually, that, you know, COVID, whilst it was serious for some people, for the vast majority of the population, it has never really posed a serious threat. So from the outset, instead of taking this blanket approach of lockdown, what we should have done is targeted resources at more vulnerable people. And if this kickstarts that debate, and if that's a way to introducing what I would say is that more sensible approach in the future, then that won't necessarily be a bad thing, I think.
I think fundamentally it's fantastic to show that the vaccine is so effective, particularly with that booster dose. I think my concern is, you know, obviously we get very concerned when new variants start emerging, usually from elsewhere in the world. And I think, you know, there is some kind of speculation that the only way we're going to stop those new variants in their tracks is by getting vaccines out to, you know, places like South Africa, for example, where we saw Omicron emerge from. I suppose by not doing a fourth jab, that means that some of those stocks can be sent out to some of those other nations. Arlene, what do you reckon?
No, I think that is an important point. And I mean, some people have been very vocal on this. Gordon Brown, as you know, the former Prime Minister, has been saying for quite some time that we do need to look to the rest of the world. And of course, Omicron started because there were people who were immunosuppressed, if I can get it out, that actually the COVID virus then changed and became the Omicron variant. And then that spread and became very transmissible. So we do need to look to the rest of the world, because we live in a village, as we know. People travel all the time, and therefore what happens in South Africa one day will happen in the UK the very next day or within a very short period of time. So we do need to look at the global village that we live in. And to deal with all of those problems as well. I think it's interesting as well that the government today it's been reported that they're talking about cutting down on free lateral flow tests. I think that is something that will concern people as well. The Education Secretary said that's not the plan, that they will continue to provide free lateral flow tests. Here in Northern Ireland, of course, as always, with the border with the Republic of Ireland, we're seeing people who have to pay for lateral flow tests in the Republic of Ireland coming up to Northern Ireland to gain access to free tests. We're seeing that right along the border. I have been contacted by a number of people who work in these test centres, and that is what they're saying, that people from the Republic of Ireland are coming up because the tests are free here in the UK and they're not free in the Republic of Ireland. So I think it is important that we continue to have those access to those lateral free tests, because we're now moving away from PCR tests, and therefore we do need to have those lateral flow tests available to everybody.
Yeah, no, I'd agree with you. And I must say that the availability of them was a bit of a challenge, wasn't it, a few weeks ago? But it does seem like that's getting a lot smoother. And I think the government's pretty much doubled the supply, and every school's been delivered the tests that they've requested. So I think props to the government on that one for kind of getting their act together and making sure people have access to those tests. But Arlene, I want to stick with you, because you talked there about the sort of differences between Northern Ireland and the Republic. But of course, there are differences between the devolved nations as well. At the moment, the UK government remains at odds with the other countries in choosing to keep nightclubs open and to allow hospitality to operate without further measures here in England. Health Secretary Sajid Javid has insisted that restrictions on freedom must be an absolute last resort. Writing in the Daily Mail last week, he said, "I've been acutely conscious of the enormous health, social and economic costs of lockdowns." What do you reckon? I mean, I think he's dead right. Do you think that the devolved nations have gone a bit too far?
Well, I really welcome the fact that there is this balance in the conversation, and I thought the Health Secretary's comments were really on the money, because, of course, all of these restrictions were meant to be proportionate. They were only meant to be brought in if they were absolutely necessary to the well-being of our citizens. And I just worry that some of the devolved nations have gone too far in terms of the restrictions. I think that the Prime Minister has got it right. Yes, he did take a risk before Christmas in not going further, but I think it has paid off. I thought it was very interesting to hear Mark Drakeford say that England was an outlier and that the Prime Minister wasn't protecting the English people. And of course, in Wales, they've got a higher incidence rate than they have in England. So that's a little bit strange to hear Mark Drakeford attack the Prime Minister in that way. But of course, this is what happens. He went so far as actually banning park runs, which I thought was absolutely incredible. When you're outside, when you're taking exercise, when you're not at risk, but yet he banned park runs. And I saw that just before Christmas, and there were a lot of people commenting on that as a step too far. So it brings back to the debate, Deanna, about whether this should have been a UK approach to COVID. At the time, the Prime Minister decided to devolve to the different parts of the UK the powers to deal with these issues. And I think this is a discussion that will continue, particularly as we move towards the independent inquiry on how COVID has been dealt with. I think that'll be a key element of it, whether it should have been left at Westminster or whether it should have went down to the devolved administrations.
So, Paul, I'm keen to come to you on this, because obviously we've seen Welsh Labour and Mark Drakeford take a very different approach to that's kind of been taken in England. How much of that do you think is kind of strictly following the science, and how much of it do you think is a little bit of political posturing to show we're doing something different to what's going on in Westminster?
I think there's been an enormous amount of political posturing actually throughout this whole pandemic. And I have to say, I think that people in the camp that has argued consistently for more restrictions and more infringements on people's freedoms and liberties probably do need to show a little bit of humility. I mean, I remember back when the government lifted the restrictions in July, and there were all sorts of warnings of how this was going to lead to the collapse of the National Health Service, how it was going to lead to thousands more deaths. And it didn't actually happen. And then we were in a similar situation just before Christmas, and those same voices were demanding that the government impose restrictions again, particularly in the light of the Omicron variant. And again, their worst warnings didn't come to fruition, thank God. And it does strike me that actually people who kind of make these forecasts of doom are not properly held to account when their predictions don't actually come to fruition. And my view actually is that I think people should be held to account as much if they overstate the risks of the virus, and they're proven to have overstated the risks, as when people on the other side understate the risks. But it seems to me that that doesn't happen. Where people, governments, etc., are alleged to have understated the risks, they'll be hammered. But of course, if you overstate the risk and you demand that government impose restrictions, those restrictions themselves obviously have a severe impact on people's lives in terms of, you know, their mental health, their physical health, the state of the economy, people's jobs, entire industries potentially going under. And therefore, you know, if you impose, or if you demand that governments impose those restrictions rather, and it turns out that you were wrong, you ought to be scrutinised and held to account for it. But it doesn't seem to happen, and I think that's been the imbalance in the debate throughout the whole pandemic.
Yeah, I think it's been interesting. I don't know if you've spotted it, but in The Spectator, they've been doing a sort of day-by-day analysis of the modelling that came from Imperial versus what actually happened in terms of kind of hospitalisations. And thankfully, what's actually happened has been much, much less severe. You know, the numbers in hospital have been really low, which is obviously an incredibly good thing. But I think that goes back to your point there, Paul, that, you know, when that modelling is so far off, you would hope that they would be held to account, but it doesn't really seem to have happened so much right throughout, does it?
No, and you know, the debate isn't over. You know, some people, I think, would like to think the debate is over. The people who have invested so much in the efficacy of lockdowns and of masks, you know, when the evidence points against them, and I know we're going to come on to some of that later in the programme in terms of masks, it seems that they want those stories buried. I mean, in terms of lockdown, for example, you can look at countries like Sweden and Japan, which took a more relaxed approach to lockdown, and actually, in the great scheme of things, don't seem to have done much worse than countries like our own. So the idea that there was only one particular view and that view all along was right, I don't think should be, you know, those pushing that, I don't think should be allowed to get away with it. At some point, I think the bill for our approach is going to land. And when it does, in terms of the impact on people's jobs and their health, I think that we're going to get a nasty surprise.
Well, you're right. It's about that wider impact. And I think a lot of the scientists have been focusing solely on COVID. That's what they've been tasked to do, to look at, you know, how restrictions might help when it comes to actual COVID numbers. But without taking into account the wider impacts of, you know, what it's been doing to people's mental health, to businesses that have been going under, and obviously to children's education as well. We've had an interesting one this week, haven't we, on face masks in schools, with the government evidence effectively saying that the evidence remains not conclusive. I think their own study in autumn didn't provide proof of a statistically significant impact of wearing face masks in schools. Evidence reviews say other studies have provided mixed results, but what should we do? Because it must be really challenging. I mean, wearing them's a little bit uncomfortable, but I think we can kind of get past that. But it's more that sort of face-to-face learning, you know, having to wear one in the classroom, not being able to really respond to facial expressions, particularly for children with any kind of learning disabilities, must be really difficult. Arlene, what are your thoughts? Should we be making our kids wear masks in schools?
Yeah, this is a really difficult one, and I note that the report that you're talking about, I think the difference was something like 0.6%, which is very minimal and certainly within the margin of error. I think people, and particularly older school children, could deal with face masks as long as it was for a short period of time. The reality is now people, particularly here in Northern Ireland and some of the other devolved nations, we're now expecting our children to wear masks in classrooms all of the time. And I think it's wrong for the reasons that you've already articulated in terms of engaging and learning. For teachers, it must be incredibly difficult to read how children are responding to what they're being taught. And I myself have realised once I started to wear masks and I was speaking to other people wearing masks, I must lip read a little bit because I was finding it very difficult to understand people and to hear what they were saying. And if I'm finding that, I'm sure there are many, many other people who are finding this barrier of communication really, really difficult. And I think especially for our young people, they need to be able to engage. This barrier that is surrounding them, when you see the evidence that is now coming forward that actually it's not protecting them in a way that we were told it was, I think it's very concerning. And if I can bring you back right to the start of COVID-19, and we had this debate about masks. And initially, we were told, no, don't be wearing masks because actually it might actually spread the disease because you're taking masks off and touching your face. And then all of a sudden it became the norm and it was accepted as the norm. And I'm not a great believer in masks. Obviously, if you're coughing, you should cover your face and deal with that. But wearing masks all the time, I think, will have long-term impacts. Paul has already mentioned it, mental health impacts, socialization impacts, and I think we need to be a lot more evidence-based when it comes to dealing with masks.
Yeah. Well, send us your views. Send us your views whether you think children should be wearing masks in schools, your overall views on masks. But most importantly, stay tuned because after the break, we will be discussing the petition that 1 million people have signed to have Tony Blair's knighthood rescinded. Stay in touch and stay tuned.
Hello there, I'm Eamon.
And I'm Isabel.
And you're watching the GB News digital stream across the United Kingdom.
And around the world.
If you're here in the UK, you can also watch us on your TV screen. GB News is Freeview channel 236.
On Sky, we're channel 515.
626 on Virgin Media.
Just remember, you might need to retune your TV to watch the channel.
Yeah, and if you are doing that, find out more about retuning by going to gbnews.uk.
Join my show Farage, 7 p.m. till 8 p.m. Monday through Thursday. And there you will get opinion, analysis, debate, and I'll cover stories that nobody else dares to touch. And then for the last 15 minutes, talking pints. We're over a drink. We have a civilized conversation with someone. We very often disagree, but we do it in a grown-up way. Come and join me on Farage.
I'm Dan Wootton. Join me Monday to Thursday from 9 to 11 for the feistiest and most fun news debate on TV, where free speech reigns. I'll bring you a sharp take on the day's biggest stories, bombshell newsmaker interviews, and A-list guests. And I guarantee you, no spin, no bias, no censorship, and no reason to go to bed. That's Dan Wootton tonight, Monday to Thursdays from 9 on GB News.
Hello there, I'm Eamon Holmes.
And I'm Isabel Webster.
And we hope you can join us for
Breakfast with Eamon
and Isabel.
You make me laugh out loud, belly laugh.
Is that important first thing in the morning?
Yeah, absolutely.
And there's me trying to be deadly serious. News is a serious business.
Yeah, I have to rein you in sometimes.
Well, it doesn't stop us laughing at it. It doesn't stop us having an opinion on what's going on.
Yeah.
And it certainly will not stop us reflecting what you think.
Weekdays from 6 to 9:30 on GB News.
Good morning and welcome back to The Political Correction. And we've been getting your views in, mainly on the phrases that annoy you the most that politicians use. Adrian here says, the one that irritates me most is, let us be quite clear about this, when they actually mean to obfuscate. Straight out of Yes Prime Minister. And we've got Ian who agrees with that. I want to be very clear. Helen says, get rid of the phrase dither and delay. Terry, Derek and Jonathan have said, lessons will be learned. Greg says, on the doorstep. And Michael says, wind energy is cheap. So keep getting in contact with us. Let us know what phrases that we politicians use really annoy you, and I promise I'll try and stop using them in the future. But now we're talking now about the front page of the Sunday Telegraph. I've got it right here, but hopefully we're going to get it up on your screens at home so that you can see it, which is Liz Truss saying, I'll use Article 16 if the EU won't bend. And Arlene, I'm keen to come to you on this, but I think what might be useful is if we just do a bit of a reminder, a recap about what Article 16 is all about.
Sure. So Article 16 is actually part of the Northern Ireland Protocol, and it was put in place there if there were problems, so that it could be a reset if there was economic or societal issues caused by the implementation of the Northern Ireland Protocol, and clearly there has been over this past year. The protocol has been in place now for just a year, and it has caused economic damage to Northern Ireland. It's causing ongoing disorder in terms of the constitutional position of Northern Ireland within the United Kingdom. And therefore, this is very welcome that Liz Truss has said, and I quote, "It's an absolute priority to resolve the unintended consequences of the protocol." Whether, I mean, I would disagree. Of course, you could have seen what was going to happen with the protocol, but I'll leave that piece. And I mean, she goes on to say that Article 16 was explicitly designed to ease the acute problems because of the sensitivities at play. And that's absolutely right. But the EU get very, very uptight if you talk about triggering Article 16. In fact, they've said, it would cause serious consequences if it was triggered by the United Kingdom, despite the fact, of course, that they triggered it last January in terms of the supply of vaccine exports. They then withdrew it, but in withdrawing it, they said they reserved the right to do it again if necessary. So it appears that the EU can trigger Article 16 if they deem it necessary, but if the UK does it, it will cause serious consequences. So I'm pleased that Liz Truss has made it clear that if she doesn't achieve a negotiated way forward in terms of the Northern Ireland Protocol, that she still is going to trigger Article 16. But to be honest, Deanna, we're all getting a little weary in Northern Ireland about these promises to trigger Article 16. We've heard it all through last year, and really we need to see action now because it is a full year since the implementation of the Northern Ireland Protocol.
So, Arlene, let's assume that Article 16 is triggered tomorrow. What would that actually look like on the ground?
Well, what it would look like is that all of the things, the barriers to trade that are currently in place, even though we are in grace periods in relation to a lot of the restrictions, those barriers could be dealt with unilaterally by the United Kingdom government. And what we would have is a free flow of trade between Great Britain and Northern Ireland, because we don't have that at the moment. And of course, that goes, we would argue, I would argue as a unionist, that goes against the Act of Union, which talked very much about having free-flowing trade across the United Kingdom. And that's why we argue very strongly that the protocol needs to be changed.
And Paul, I'm keen to come to you on this. I think the sort of threat of triggering Article 16 has been said by some as being a little bit OTT and might rub the EU up the wrong way. Do you agree with that, or do you think it's right that we take a strong stance?
No, I think it's right to invoke Article 16 in the right circumstances. The whole point of it being there is that each side has got the ability to invoke it in the event that, as Arlene said, there are societal or environmental or economic difficulties that are thrown up. I mean, it's pretty clear that the status quo is not sustainable. The situation needs to change, and it's in both sides' best interests, I think, to try to have a responsible negotiated settlement to the current discussions that are going on. But what the government cannot do is just keep bluffing about the whole thing, because, as Arlene said, people will in the end realise that they're not serious about it. And I speak as a trade union negotiator for much of my life. If you overplay a particular card, if you keep threatening that your workers are going to go on strike or something, but you never follow through with it, in the end, the employer will understand that you're probably bluffing, and that strengthens their hand. So what I would say is, don't play the card unless you're serious about it, and don't overplay it. And I do think it's probably coming to a crunch point where the government is going to have to follow through on invoking Article 16, or just accept that it's never going to do it. That time, I think, is going to come soon.
Well, send us your views. Do you think Liz Truss would be right to invoke Article 16? Let us know on gbviews@gbnews.uk. Tweet us at gbnews. Now, one of the 4 people cleared of criminal charges who tore down a statue of slave trader Edward Colston has said jury trials and freedom of speech are the cornerstones of our society amid a backlash over the verdict. The bronze memorial to the 17th century figure was pulled down during a Black Lives Matter protest in Bristol in June 2020. I think this is a really interesting one, because there has been some uproar about the decision that was made to acquit the 4 We've heard that the Attorney General might be encouraging them to potentially reconsider. Paul, what do you make of this? Because I think my view is that if we believe in a jury system, then we have to believe in the jury making their decision and not kind of kick up a fuss if we don't like that decision.
That's exactly the case. I mean, it's very straightforward as far as I'm concerned. We live in a jury system, and thank God we do, because by having a jury system, it means that if you ever are charged with something, you will be tried by a jury of your peers. It is a significant restraint on state power. It means that people can't, people within government or state actors can't just trump up charges against you and pursue a political, persecution against you. But there's a price to pay for a jury system, and it does mean that occasionally juries will make perverse or inexplicable decisions. I have to say, I think this decision was perverse and inexplicable, but there we go. We have to suck it up. That's the price that we have to pay. And we have no right to demand why the jury made the decision that it did. The jury room is sacrosanct. What goes on in that jury room, rightly, has to remain a secret. And what goes on in the head of jurors when they come to the decisions that they do, again, rightly has to remain a secret. So we will never know why the jury made the decision that it did. All we know is that under the system, they were entitled to do it. They've acquitted the defendants, and that ought to be, as far as I'm concerned, the end of the matter. I mean, in terms of the Attorney General's referral to the Court of Appeal, I sense a certain amount of political posturing going on here. I mean, the reality is the Court of Appeal cannot interfere with the original decision, and rightly so. They can clarify the law on certain things, but I suspect the Attorney General is just reacting to some of the backlash. But I do caution people against any argument that says because of one particular verdict that we don't like, that should be the basis for undermining the jury system, which, in my view, is at the heart of all civilised justice systems.
Arlene, I've seen you nodding there. Would you agree with what Paul said?
Well, I agree to a certain extent with what Paul says. I think the jury system is absolutely, I think somebody described it as a sacred cow. It is very much part of the justice system. But I think we need to roll back a little and look at what the role of a jury is. The role of a jury isn't to arbitrate on law. It is to look at the facts of the case and decide on the facts of the case. And Lord Sumption, who used to be in the Supreme Court, made a very good comment, I thought, when he said a judge can direct a jury to acquit somebody, but can't direct somebody to convict a defendant. So I think that when the facts, as in this case, seem to be uncontested, I mean, nobody's denying the fact that this happened, that criminal damage did take place. But the jury decided, and we don't know why they decided. Paul's absolutely right. They decided in that room of 12 people to convict or not to convict. But it does seem perverse that, given that the facts were uncontested, that they decided to let these people go without convicting them of criminal damage. So the question is, do we need to look at giving judges the right to direct juries to convict as well as to acquit? Because it would appear, and this is a fear, I think, that some of the jurors may have been influenced by what was going on outside of the courtroom in terms of political influence. And of course, in Northern Ireland, for a long time, we didn't have jury trials because of the fear of intimidation or the fear of influence coming from outside into jury cases. So we do need to look at the role of juries. And the role of a jury is to look at the facts and decide on those facts. And I think why people are a bit bemused by all of this is that the facts seem to be uncontested.
Yeah, it's a really tricky one, isn't it? I mean, I think if you'd asked me before the decision was made, I'd have said, of course, they're going to get convicted. It was on video, there was pretty clear evidence. But as Paul said earlier, we don't know why the jury made that decision. And frankly, we don't have any right to know the discussions that went on in that room when they went to make their decision. I find it a real interesting one. I mean, many of you will know my father was killed by a single punch when I was a kid, and the person who admitted throwing the punch was acquitted. My family could never understand why that decision was made by the jury. And yet it was made, and it'd be very easy to say the whole system's wrong because of our anger at that one decision. But even still, I stand by that this is a far better system than we could have. It's a far better system than kind of state-led kangaroo courts, as Paul suggested earlier. You know, we need that freedom. The jury need the freedom to make a decision based on the facts that are presented to them. I just think in this case, there certainly has been a lot of kickback. And I think the point you made there, Arlene, was really interesting about the fact that judges can kind of advise a jury to potentially acquit but not to convict. Paul, what do you make of that? Do you think we should equalise that?
I would be very hesitant about that. I mean, I think the cornerstone of our justice system is the presumption of innocence, and it suggests to me on first thought that actually by having a judge directing a jury to convict could possibly undermine that important principle. And nobody's saying, by the way, that we have to agree with jury decisions, particularly in examples where juries have convicted defendants, and it turns out wrongly convicted defendants. I mean, there have been many examples in our history, the Birmingham Six, for example, the Guildford Four, a number of other convictions that were wrong. And it was only because outside interested parties, journalists, campaigners, etc., took an interest in the proceedings and the decision and the evidence and thought that a jury had come to the wrong decision and campaigned to have those people acquitted, and were often quite successful in doing so. But, that's different to somebody being acquitted as a defendant, and then people then campaigning to have that overturned. That seems to me to be an entirely different proposition. So you have to take the rough with the smooth with the jury system. And I understand completely people's irritation at the outcome of this particular trial. But there we go. That's what a jury system is about. Better that one guilty person goes free than 50 innocent people are convicted. And for me, that's the long and the short of the matter.
Yeah.
I think it is important to say, of course, as well, Deanna, that this doesn't set any precedent in terms of other criminal damage cases. I think people are concerned that, does this mean I can go out and pull down the statue of Winston Churchill? Can I pull down Cromwell outside Parliament? No, it doesn't set a precedent. This is the individual facts of this particular case, and that's what the jury was deciding upon. We may disagree with it, but that's the reality.
Yeah. Quite right. Well, stay with us, because coming up, we're going to be discussing whether Tony Blair deserves to be called Sir after almost 1 million people sign a petition to say he shouldn't be. Stay with us and keep your views coming in.
Hello there, I'm Eamon.
And I'm Isabel.
And you're watching the GB News digital stream across the United Kingdom.
And around the world.
If you're here in the UK, you can also watch us on your TV screen. GB News is Freeview channel 236.
On Sky, we're channel 515.
626 on Virgin Media.
Just remember, you might need to retune your TV to watch the channel.
Yeah, and if you are doing that, find out more about retuning by going to gbnews.uk.
Join my show Farage, 7 p.m. till 8 p.m. Monday through Thursday, and there you will get opinion, analysis, debate, and I'll cover stories that nobody else dares to touch. And then for the last 15 minutes, talking pints. We're over a drink. We have a civilised conversation with someone. We very often disagree, but we do it in a grown-up way. Come and join me on Farage.
I'm Dan Wootton. Join me Monday to Thursday from 9 to 11 for the feistiest and most fun news debate on TV, where free speech reigns. I'll bring you a sharp take on the day's biggest stories, bombshell newsmaker interviews, and A-list guests. And I guarantee you, no spin, no bias, no censorship, and no reason to go to bed. That's Dan Wootton tonight, Monday to Thursdays from 9 on GB News.
Hello there, I'm Eamon Holmes.
And I'm Isabel Webster.
And we hope you can join us for
Breakfast with Eamon
and Isabel.
You make me laugh out loud, belly laugh.
Is that important first thing in the morning?
Yeah, absolutely.
And there's me trying to be deadly serious. News is a serious business.
Yeah, I have to rein you in sometimes.
Well, it doesn't stop us laughing at it. It doesn't stop us having an opinion on what's going on.
Yeah.
And it certainly will not stop us reflecting what you think.
Weekdays from 6 to 9:30 on GB News.
Good morning and welcome back to The Political Correction. And we've been getting your views in. Arlene, over to you.
Sure. So on statues, Denise says there needs to be another trial with a vetted jury, which are not a bunch of lefties. I don't think that's going to happen, Denise. The trial has taken place, and that's that. Then on annoying political phrases, James, Michael and John says, pack it in with this levelling up phrase. It's an empty platitude used to make people outside of London believe they will be treated the same as them. Jeff says his phrase that he doesn't like is Build Back Better. I think, Deanna, you're going to have to chat to your bosses about some of this. And my particular favourite is John says his most annoying political phrase is, I will trigger Article 16 if the EU doesn't listen.
Very, very topical. Well, I've got a lot more annoying political phrases here. Henry says political cliches I'd never like to hear again. He agrees with Build Back Better. He says follow the science and advise you to be cautious and protect our NHS. So a few there from Henry. But a really interesting one here from Camilla, who says, quite often politicians say, to be honest with you, or to be totally honest, which begs the question, aren't they always? Well, certainly here on GB News, we have honest debates. So we'll definitely have a bit of honesty on this channel, if not elsewhere. So, Tony Blair. This is a topic that has divided the country, as it often does the New Year's honours list. But this time it's specifically the knighthood for former Prime Minister Tony Blair. 1 million people have now signed a petition to have the knighthood rescinded. Is this a vocal minority, or does the rest of the country agree? Paul, over to you.
Well, I suspect that many people across the country do agree, actually, with people who have signed the petition. It's fairly rare, I think, that you get people take an interest in a political question to this degree, where over 1 million of them have signed a particular petition because they don't agree with something that's happened. And so when you do get that amount of interest, I think, you do have to sit up and say, well, perhaps they've got a point here, and perhaps this is rousing the ire of a certain section of the electorate. And, the truth was, he was probably going to get a knighthood at some point, and it was always going to be controversial because people haven't forgotten Iraq. And the truth is, had it not been for Iraq, we wouldn't even be discussing this now. But I think that decision to invade Iraq was so contentious, and as it turns out, was such a blunder, arguably the biggest foreign policy blunder, I think, in our modern history as a nation. That sore still runs very deep, I think. And when you consider the number of people who lost their lives, not just British servicemen, but innocent Iraqis as well, when you consider the damage that it did to the United Nations, when you consider how it allowed terrorists to move into Iraq and, turn that country into a really dangerous country in the years afterwards, then you realise the epic scale of the blunder. And for me, really, Deanna, the final nail in the coffin, I think, of Blair's reputation on this was the Chilcot report. When the Chilcot report was published in, I think it was 2016 or thereabouts, I think that report was so devastating that really I don't think there was any salvaging his reputation after that, because that report, after taking a huge amount of evidence over many, many years, came to the view that Saddam Hussein was not at the time an urgent threat to our interests, that peaceful alternatives had not been exhausted, that the intelligence was spun, and was really heavily critical of Tony Blair individually. And once that report was published, I don't see how there was any way back for him. So the knighthood, in my view, is wrong, and I can understand entirely why so many people have signed the petition. That's not to say that Tony Blair didn't do a number of good things whilst he was Prime Minister, because he did. But unfortunately, everything, I think, is clouded by Iraq. I think that is undeniable.
Mm-hmm. I think the people on the other side of the argument are saying that maybe an honour should be kind of guaranteed if you make it and become Prime Minister. Arlene, would you kind of agree with that view? You're more on the side of Paul, and when are we going to see Dame Arlene?
Well, what I would say is that I don't think it should be an automatic right. I think maybe there should be a convention that if you have been Prime Minister and held the highest office in the land in terms of politics, then that should be recognised. But I think it's wrong to make it an automatic right. What's the point of having an honour system if it's just an automatic award? But I think people are angry about this, Sienna, because it's not just an ordinary knighthood. This is actually, he's been made a Knight of the Garter, and there are only 65 of those. And it's a very, very high honour awarded by Her Majesty the Queen. We are told herself, she makes the decision. And I think that's why people are getting very excited about it. If he was just a run-of-the-mill knight, I'm not sure you would have such a reaction to this. And it's very interesting, isn't it, that a lot of commentators are saying that the timing of this is interesting because it comes after Prince Philip has passed away, because we know that Prince Philip was not a big Tony Blair fan, nor was he a big fan of some of the things that he was involved in. Now that Prince Philip has passed on, it has been decided that Tony Blair should get this award. And the reason for that, people are saying, is because he was acting as a blocker to other people who came after him in terms of David Cameron, Gordon Brown, Theresa May herself, who actually is a lady because her husband is now a knight, as it were, but in her own right, she hasn't been awarded any honour. So it's interesting to look at that side of it as well. But I do think, he did, he was a Prime Minister for a long time. He was involved in a lot of good for the country. But I think it's the fact that it is this high-level knighthood. That's why people are very excited about it.
Mm-hmm. Paul, do you think that's the case, or do you think it's just the fact that he's getting an honour at all?
No, I think it's the fact that he's just getting an honour at all. I mean, I think Arlene raises a valid point that it does make it more contentious in terms of the Knight of the Garter aspect of it. But and I also agree that it's the fact that there was clearly a backlog as well in terms of handing out honours to Brown and Cameron and May, and it would have been, I guess, difficult to hand honours to those prime ministers and to leave Tony Blair out. That would have been seen as contentious in its own right. But no, I think that people, I mean, simply his reputation is destroyed, and his reputation is destroyed because of what happened in Iraq and because of the implications of that decision to invade Iraq, and because of the controversy that the whole thing threw up. And there are people out there who will never forgive him personally for making that decision. And he quite often intervenes in public life, as we see. But I think a lot of people just automatically switch off, because I think that the whole affair was so damning, and the Chilcot report was so devastating, that whatever else he did in public life, and as I said before, he did a lot of good in public life, it will always be outweighed by which was arguably, as I said, the biggest foreign policy blunder in our modern history. And I just don't see that changing.
Mm-hmm. Well, GB News family, let us know what you think. Drop us an email, drop us a tweet, let us know, do you think Tony Blair deserves a knighthood? Now, Kazakhstan's President Tokayev has authorised security forces to shoot to kill those participating in unrest, calling them terrorists. The Central Asian nation this week experienced its worst protests since gaining independence from the Soviet Union 3 decades ago, and dozens have been killed. We can now speak to Torakua Durov, who's director at the Kazakh service at Radio Free Europe. So, Torakaya, explain to our viewers and listeners what ignited this whole situation.
Actually, it all started on 2nd of January as a usual protest of several hundred of oil workers in oil-rich Mangistau region in western Kazakhstan. And they demanded to reduce the price for the liquefied petroleum gas, which is there usually mostly used as a fuel for car. After their demand was not satisfied, the groups of ordinary protesters in other regions have also started supporting them, gathering to their main squares in their cities. And they were not only economic demands, but also political questions were raised. Many were chanting the slogan "Shalket," which means, if to translate from Kazakh language, is "old man go away," meaning the former president Nursultan Nazarbayev, who still remained the most powerful politician in the country after his official resignation 2 years ago. And the current President Tokayev actions after this, like resignation of the government, if you probably heard, and reducing the price gas, and some other promises, did not calm the protesters. And many analysts now are saying that the government and president reacted too late, and now after that, protest movement became just uncontrollable.
Mm-hmm. So, in terms of what's going on the ground, how bad is the situation and how widespread are the protests?
We can say that protests now are stopped, almost stopped. Yesterday, we were reporting from Western Janauzen city, where actually it all started on 2nd of January. It was the last city where protesters stopped their protest and returned to work, but only a few dozens of people who are thinking that their demands have not been fulfilled, they're still standing. Otherwise, in all other cities, it was stopped.
Mm-hmm. And Torakua, what do you expect will happen next politically?
It is quite difficult to predict because, as you know, the emergency situation declared in the country by president, and it is still continuing until the 19th of January. The authorities now are reporting that the special operation against terrorists, as they call, is still going on in Almaty and other cities. And on today morning, the Ministry of Internal Affairs reported about more than 5,100 people arrested among those protesters or terrorists, as they call. There were also news about the amount of weapons seized from them in different cities. And, you know, there's almost no protests, as I said. And yesterday, our journalists from different corners of the country started reporting that the ordinary people's life is returning to normal. Banks started working, shops open, and many other facilities also started working, because in the first days, as you remember, there were no, cash. Shops were receiving only cash. Bank didn't work. Electronic cards didn't work. ATMs were out of money or damaged, and they were looters. Burning the shops, but now everything's calm. But country is still living in internet blackout. Only in Nur Sultan and some other cities, internet appears for several hours only. It is very difficult to predict how the situation will develop. Everything will depend on how quickly authorities and army can restore their situation, peace, and finish their operation, and what will happen next in terms of the government, because now in last several days there was so many changes. Analysts are saying the big throne games, I would say, is continuing in Kazakhstan between the former and current president, former President Nursultan Nazarbayev and current President Kassym-Jomart Tokayev. But we don't know. We don't have concrete information. But only what we hear that the current president, took from the former president the leadership on the Security Council, and later there was information yesterday that the former KNB head, KNB is a National Security Service head, was arrested for treason, and it is quite a serious accusation for allowing this what happened in Almaty, because president in 2 days ago in his address to nation, he said there were 20,000 terrorists came to Almaty to Kazakhstan on 5th of January, and they were kind of main people who started the violence.
Mm-hmm. Well, Torakua, thank you so much for joining us. Torakua Durov there, joining us directly from Kazakhstan to talk about the ongoing situation there. Paul, Arlene, what have you made of this? I mean, there hasn't been a great deal of coverage really here in the UK, but the scenes on the ground look pretty grave, didn't they, Paul?
Yeah, they did, and it's clearly, given the position of Kazakhstan, it borders Russia and China. Geopolitically, I think it's potentially has huge ramifications. It's clearly a very deeply authoritarian government. Public protests are illegal in Kazakhstan. There's a history of the government clamping down on strikes and demonstrations, etc. And I think we're seeing now just how ruthless the government can be. It's an interesting country in the sense that it's very oil rich, but at the same time, its people are largely very poor. And as a result of the government's decision to lift the price cap on liquefied petroleum gas, it's had a huge impact financially on many families. And as we know, that's largely what sparked the riots. But I think internationally, we need to show solidarity with people who are protesting for their democratic rights. Whether or not those people tactically should be setting fire to police stations and whatever, I guess is a different question, because what that kind of thing does is allows the ruthless government to come back in a heavy-handed way and to do what they're doing, which is to shoot people. But certainly in terms of, peaceful civil obedience and democratic protests, I think, we need to show our solidarity with those people. Very wary about, the American government, for example, becoming involved and speaking out as they are, because let's be blunt, the US government hasn't itself got a great history of intervention. But yeah, as a nation, I think we should be expressing our solidarity with those on the ground fighting for their democratic rights and for human rights inside Kazakhstan.
Well, Arlene, I think for me one of the most kind of shocking things was the fact that there was a shoot-to-kill order for the sort of protesters who were getting a bit violent. It just seems a bit baffling to us here in Britain, doesn't it?
Yeah, and I think it is important that we on GB News talk about this, because there's been very little coverage about what's happening in Kazakhstan. And as Paul says, from a geopolitical point of view, it's a very important region. And if things go wrong, there could have ramifications right across the globe. Over 30 people have been killed on the protesters' side, and as I understand it, up on 20 security officers have been killed as well. So that's a big toll in terms of human life. And I think one of the concerning elements of all of this is the fact that the organisation called the Collective Security Treaty Organisation, which is led by Russia, was invited in by the president of Kazakhstan to try and stabilise the issue. And of course, that brings Russia and Putin right into the middle of all of this. And indeed, I'm sure is causing a lot of concern in Whitehall and indeed, as Paul has said, in America as well. The fact that Putin seems to be getting more influence in that region of the world. So he could only be invited in Vienna if the president assessed that there was international interference in the country. And that's why you've heard him talk about, foreign interests are coming in and foreign terrorists are coming in. So it's something that we need to keep an eye on. And I think we in GB News need to keep talking about this to inform our viewers about what's happening.
Well, I agree. And we will keep talking about it, and stay with us, because in the next hour we'll have plenty more to talk about, including the latest of the gay cake complaint. More on that in a moment.
Hello there, I'm Eamon.
And I'm Isabel.
And you're watching the GB News digital stream across the United Kingdom.
And around the world.
If you're here in the UK, you can also watch us on your TV screen. GB News is Freeview channel 236.
On Sky, we're channel 515.
626 on Virgin Media.
Just remember, you might need to retune your TV to watch the channel.
Yeah, and if you are doing that, find out more about retuning by going to gbnews.uk.
Join my show Farage, 7 p.m. till 8 p.m. Monday through Thursday. And there you will get opinion, analysis, debate, and I'll cover stories that nobody else dares to touch. And then for the last 15 minutes, talking pints. We're over a drink. We have a civilized conversation with someone. We very often disagree, but we do it in a grown-up way. Come and join me on Farage.
I'm Dan Wootton, join me Monday to Thursday from 9 to 11 for the feistiest and most fun news debate on TV, where free speech reigns. I'll bring you a sharp take on the day's biggest stories, bombshell newsmaker interviews, and A-list guests. And I guarantee you, no spin, no bias, no censorship, and no reason to go to bed. That's Dan Wootton tonight, Monday to Thursdays from 9 on GB News.
Hello there, I'm Eamon Holmes.
And I'm Isabel Webster.
And we hope you can join us for
Breakfast with Eamon.
And Isabel.
You make me laugh out loud, belly laugh.
Is that important first thing in the morning?
Yeah, absolutely.
And there's me trying to be deadly serious. News is a serious business.
Yeah, I have to rein you in sometimes.
Well, it doesn't stop us laughing at it. It doesn't stop us having an opinion on what's going on.
Yeah.
And it certainly will not stop us reflecting what you think.
Weekdays from 6 to 9:30 on GB News.
Good morning, you're watching GB News and welcome back to today's Political Correction. I'm Deanna Davison and I'm joined by Arlene Foster, live from Northern Ireland, and Paul Embry, live from Norfolk. But first, here's the latest news.
Good morning, I'm Olivia Guthrie. This is your news at 11 o'clock. The Education Secretary's become the first government minister to back reducing the isolation period from 7 to 5 days. Nadine Zahawi says he'll be led by the UK Health Security Agency on the matter, but he thinks it would be helpful for teaching staff shortages if it did decide to cut the isolation time down for those who test positive with COVID. Well, Nadine Zahawi is also insisting lateral flow tests will remain free following reports they could be limited to high-risk settings. Scotland's First Minister Nicola Sturgeon and the Labour Party had criticised such a wrong-headed move, but Mr Zahawi says he's puzzled by a report in the Sunday Times suggesting their universal availability might be axed. Meanwhile, the UK has reached a total COVID-related death toll of more than 150,000 since the pandemic began. The Australian government has failed in a bid to delay Novak Djokovic's appeal against deportation over his COVID vaccination status. It wanted to postpone the hearing until after the Australian Open draw is finalised. The world's top-ranked tennis player is spending a fourth day in an immigration detention centre ahead of a court case tomorrow. Player Renata Vorakova from the Czech Republic has now left the country after having her visa cancelled. Foreign Secretary says she's prepared to override unilaterally parts of the post-Brexit agreement on Northern Ireland if negotiations fail. Writing in the Sunday Telegraph, Liz Truss warns she's willing to trigger Article 16, which would suspend parts of the treaty designed to prevent a hard border with the Republic. She's meeting her EU counterpart this week for face-to-face talks. Talking to GB News, former First Minister of Northern Ireland, Arlene Foster, accused the EU of having double standards.
In fact, they've said, it would cause serious consequences if it was triggered by the United Kingdom, despite the fact, of course, that they triggered it last January in terms of the supply of vaccine exports. They then withdrew it, but in withdrawing it, they said they reserved the right to do it again if necessary.
At least 7 people have been killed after part of a cliff collapsed onto leisure boats near a waterfall on a Brazilian lake. 3 people are still missing and 32 others injured following the accident yesterday in the southeast of the country. The Brazilian Navy, which helped in the rescue, said it would investigate the causes of the accident. The biggest ever space telescope mirror has now moved into place and could soon explore the depths of the universe.
We have a fully deployed JWST observatory.
All right.
Engineers from NASA and the European Space Agency celebrated as its 18 hexagonal segment straightened out into its full shape. The last part of the James Webb Space Telescope mirror was launched by rocket on Christmas Day. NASA scientist Jane Rigby says it'll take a while to decipher the first images.
I like to think of it as it's like we have 18 mirrors that are right now little prima donnas all doing their own thing, singing their own tune in whatever key they're in, and we have to make them work like a chorus. And that is a methodical, laborious process. We want to make sure that the first images that the world sees, that humanity sees from this telescope, do justice to this $10 billion telescope and are not those, hey, look, a star.
A no-fly zone could be put over Windsor Castle. The Metropolitan Police are reviewing security at the Queen's residence. An application's been made for a restriction that would prevent aircraft lower than 2,500 foot passing overhead. It's after an alleged intruder carrying a crossbow was arrested on Christmas Day at the castle. And the Duchess of Cambridge has released 3 new portraits to mark turning 40 today. Fashion photographer Paolo Roversi took the birthday pictures, which show Kate in a series of Alexander McQueen dresses with her hair flowing. She's also wearing a pair of earrings that once belonged to her mother-in-law, Diana, Princess of Wales. It's 5 minutes past 11. You're right up to date. I'll have the latest headlines in half an hour. For now, let's get back to the political correction.
Good morning, you're watching GB News and this is The Political Correction. I'm Deanna Davison and joining me today is Arlene Foster live from Northern Ireland and Paul Embry live from Norfolk. Coming up this hour, the gay cake case takes another turn after the complaint was ruled inadmissible by the European Court of Human Rights. What do you think about it? Please do let us know. Novak Djokovic's lawyers have claimed he was granted a vaccine exemption to enter Australia because he contracted COVID-19 last month. But does this set a bad example for the rest of the world? And what are the annoying phrases you would like we politicians to stop using? We've got a few examples ourselves, but we'd like to hear from you. So get involved in the conversation. Email us on gbviews@gbnews.uk or tweet us at gbnews. This is The Political Correction. The European Court of Human Rights this week took the decision to dismiss a legal challenge in a 7-year row over the controversial refusal by a bakery in Northern Ireland to make a cake sporting a phrase supporting same-sex marriage. Joining us now is GB News reporter in Northern Ireland, Doogie Beattie. Good morning, Doogie. For everyone at home who maybe hasn't seen this story, can you just break down what's happened?
Well, good morning and welcome to Stormont here in Northern Ireland, the home of Northern Ireland's government. This story happened in 2014 when the gay activist Gareth Lee walked into Asher's Bakery in Royal Avenue and asked for a cake to be made. Not a problem with that, but then he wanted the cake iced with a message that supported gay marriage. The owners of Asher's Bakery were Christians and decided that they didn't want involved in a political statement. Now, there's nothing bad about that. Most retailers don't like getting involved in anything political. In fact, they like to try and sort of be open to most customers. They apologised, gave him his money back, and he had the cake made somewhere else. The problem was that he then went to the Equality Commission in Northern Ireland. The Equality Commission, of course, was made by Mo Molan that brought in all the commissions as sort of a super commission, if you like, back in the 90s. And that is meant to represent everybody in Northern Ireland. The Equality Commission then helped him take a case against Asher's Bakery, and you can imagine the strain and stress that put on that family over the next 7 years. And it was twice upheld by the courts in Northern Ireland, but then went to the Supreme Court in London, who ruled in favour of Asher's Bakery. And then the Equality Commission backed away slightly from Gareth Lee, but Gareth Lee then took it on to the European Courts of Human Rights, who last week, at the end of it all, said that, well, it was inadmissible and that his human rights really hadn't been challenged at all. Now, there's a few problems with that. The case itself needed to be backed in favour of Asher's, because by doing so, they actually protected the rights of the minorities in Northern Ireland. It means that nobody could walk into a shop or a bakery owned by a same-sex couple and ask for them to put a message on a cake, or indeed a printers that might want something printed on T-shirts or whatever. So it means that business can turn around and say they want to deal with who they want to deal with. Now, the biggest problem of all this, of course, is that the Equality Commission is an arm's-length body, and it is actually funded by public money. The bill for this in total was £500,000. Now, they agreed to split that both ways, which means that the Equality Commission actually paid out £250,000, £250,000 of public money, and they are controlled by the executive committee behind. Now, I did ask them for comment, and they just sent me an email saying what they spent and what they spent it on, which was, well, it's not really good enough for public bodies to be doing that. They need to be coming forward and telling us exactly what their thinking was on representing a case that could actually have well caused more minorities in Northern Ireland to be attacked further in a business way.
Hughie, thank you for that absolutely splendid overview, which I think has given viewers at home a really good feel for how this has happened and how long it's gone on for as well. But now we are joined by Peter Tatchell, who is a campaigner for LGBT and human rights for over 40 years now. Peter, what have you made of the latest?
Well, of course, I did not agree with Ashes. They opposed same-sex marriage. They supported discrimination against same-sex couples who wanted to marry. And of course, I've always supported the LGBT plus community in Northern Ireland. But on this particular case, I think that sadly, on balance, Ashes should not have been compelled to provide a cake with a political message. So the upshot is that Ashes did not refuse to serve Gareth Lee. They did not discriminate against him because of his sexual orientation. What they did was refuse to put a political message, support same-sex marriage or support gay marriage, on his cake. Now, in a free society, I don't think it's right that anyone should be compelled to promote or facilitate an idea with which they disagree. And so, as much as I object to Asher's opposition to marriage equality, I think they're entitled to follow their conscience and have the right to not promote a message, a political message, with which they profoundly have a conscientious objection.
Mm-hmm. And of course, when the gay cake row kicked off, was it 2014, I think it first started? That was before same-sex marriage was actually legalised in Northern Ireland. Do you think now you might get that same situation if you know, for example, I was to go into a cake shop and ask for a sort of cake with a pro same-sex marriage message on it? Do you think that you might still get some of that kickback, or do you think people might be a little bit more cautious now, given that the sort of law has moved on?
Well, of course, Asher's Bakery was an exception. Lots of other bakeries in Northern Ireland were very happy to provide a cake with the message, support gay marriage. It was only Asher's that refused. At the end of the day, you know, we have to recognise that in a free society, it'd be very wrong, for example, to force a gay baker to decorate a cake with a message against same-sex marriage. And that's what we could have ended up with if the judgment had gone the other way. Or equally, if Asher's had been found to have acted unlawfully and discriminated against Gareth Lee, you could have found a situation where a Jewish publisher might have been capable of being legally compelled to publish a book advocating Holocaust denial. I just think that's so wrong. You know, I'm all in favour of protests against Asher's, peaceful protests, but I don't think they should be forced by law. What this case should have really been about is Asher's violation of their contract. Asher's advertised that they would make a cake and decorate it with any message that the customer wanted. So when Gareth Lee asked for his message, support gay marriage, and Asher's refused, that was a breach of contract. And I always said from the outset, that is the issue under which Asher's Bakery should have been challenged. Sadly, it wasn't.
Mm-hmm. Well, I think it's a really fascinating case, but I think one of the things that will probably worry people, as Doogie highlighted there, was the cost of the kind of court case after court case after court case. Do you think that it was right that this kind of kept being appealed and, you know, with the relevant cost of the taxpayer? Would you have supported that?
I think there was basically a fundamental misinterpretation, in my view, of the law. Of course, discrimination against people is always wrong.
Mm-hmm.
But Asher's was not discriminating against the person, Gareth Lee. They were discriminating against the political idea, same-sex marriage. And I think there's a big, big difference. And certainly I was somewhat surprised that the Equality Commission in Northern Ireland took on this case. And I think that they and others have somewhat misrepresented what the case was about. Not intentionally or deliberately, but they've taken a view that this was about sexual orientation when it wasn't. It was about a political message.
Mm-hmm. And I suppose my final question, Peter, is do you think that these things should be resolved much more quickly? Because we're almost 8 years down the line now from the point at which Asher's refused to make the cake. Do you think that this kind of legal system should be able to respond to these things in a much quicker fashion?
Well, of course, ideally, yes, but appeals processes do take a long time. And of course, as we know, the government has cut back the courts and the whole criminal justice system quite a lot. And of course, it has slowed down the hearing of some of these cases. But obviously, it shouldn't have dragged on all these years. It should have been resolved much sooner. But, you know, when you go to the Supreme Court, there's a long queue of cases. When you go to the European Court of Human Rights, there's a long queue. So inevitably, it does take some time. But in my view, far too long. It'd be much better to have had an earlier, swifter judgment. But when you have appeal after appeal, it does get dragged out.
Mm-hmm. Well, Peter, thank you so much for joining us on GB News today. Peter Tatchell there discussing the gay cake row where the European Court of Human Rights has dismissed the appeal there. And we've had plenty of your views coming in this morning. On masks, we have Peter who says, I'm married to a South Korean lady. We've lived in many different countries because of my job. A lot of our time was in the Asia-Pacific region. And I know that wearing masks in the winter or when people have coughs and colds is a normal procedure. So my wife over here in the UK insists on wearing a mask because of her Korean culture. But we in Western Europe tend to push back on our authorities much more than the countries in Asia-Pacific. There's no answer to any of this. I guess we should just let each other get on with their lives. Arlene, you've got some views there as well, I believe.
Sure, yes. I have a lot of views on the issue of Tony Blair's knighthood. Tony Blair was one of the worst prime ministers this country has ever had, and to award him any kind of honour is an absolute disgrace, says Brian. Christine, she says that no way should Tony Blair get a knighthood. It's an insult to that high office that his name should appear on the list of knights of the realm. And Tony says, I cannot abide or forgive the traitor for what he did to veterans by selling them out in the Good Friday Agreement to appease Sinn Féin IRA, the results of which are currently being played out in Northern Ireland. So that's a Northern Ireland viewer clearly giving his view on Tony Blair as well.
Mm-hmm. Well, loads of views again coming in about annoying political phrases as well. Elaine says unprecedented times. Andy says take back control. Alison says too little too late. Pauline, we're all in it together. And Robert says this is what the people want. How do they know? Well, keep them coming in. Keep your views coming in, gbviews@gbnews.uk. And stay with us because coming up, we will discuss the recent row over Novak Djokovic's vaccine exemption. Don't go anywhere.
It's time to remind ourselves there's always another winter. Canary Islands sponsors the weather.
Well, let's have a look at the weather for you. And the UK is looking dry across southeast England, but elsewhere a mix of sunshine and showers. So let's have the details for you. And thicker cloud and rain will move into West Cornwall by midday. Elsewhere, remaining bright with sunshine and showers. Not as windy as yesterday, with highs around 9. A dry, bright and fresh morning across southeast England. Light winds, but with plenty of winter sunshine. Chilly with highs of 7. The cloudiest skies across Wales this morning will be in the west, with some showers here. Elsewhere, brighter with sunny spells. Bit of a chilly start, but then a bright morning across much of the Midlands, with plenty of sunny spells, but perhaps just the odd shower. It's a chilly day again, highs of 6 Celsius. Now, moving on to northwest England, it's going to be cloudy and damp. Northeast England will be drier and brighter with sunny spells, perhaps a few light showers. Temperatures around 5 Celsius by lunchtime. A cold, frosty but sunny morning across northeast Scotland. Elsewhere, often cloudy with showers, those showers falling as snow over the higher ground. Edinburgh largely cloudy with highs of 5. Fairly cloudy skies expected across Northern Ireland as well, with a scattering of showers. Some of those showers could be heavy at times. Top temperatures 7 Celsius, 45 Fahrenheit. For the rest of Sunday, rain will edge into the far west. Elsewhere, a scattering of showers are possible. And that's how you weather.
Canary Islands sponsors the weather.
Hello there, I'm Eamon.
And I'm Isabel.
And you're watching the GB News digital stream across the United Kingdom.
And around the world.
If you're here in the UK, you can also watch us on your TV screen. GB News is Freeview channel 236.
On Sky, we're channel 515.
626 on Virgin Media.
Just remember, you might need to retune your TV to watch the channel.
Yeah, and if you are doing that, find out more about retuning by going to gbnews.uk. Join my show Farage, 7 p.m. till 8 p.m. Monday through Thursday, and there you will get opinion, analysis, debate, and I'll cover stories that nobody else dares to touch. And then for the last 15 minutes, talking pints. We're over a drink. We have a civilised conversation with someone. We very often disagree, but we do it in a grown-up way. Come and join me on Farage.
I'm Dan Wootton. Join me Monday to Thursday from 9 to 11 for the feistiest and most fun news debate on TV, where free speech reigns. I'll bring you a sharp take on the day's biggest stories, bombshell newsmaker interviews, and A-list guests. And I guarantee you, no spin, no bias, no censorship, and no reason to go to bed. That's Dan Wootton tonight, Monday to Thursdays from 9 on GB News.
Hello there, I'm Eamon Holmes.
And I'm Isabel Webster.
And we hope you can join us for
Breakfast with Eamon.
And Isabel.
You make me laugh out loud, belly laugh.
Is that important first thing in the morning?
Yeah, absolutely.
And there's me trying to be deadly serious. News is a serious business.
Yeah, I have to rein you in sometimes.
Well, it doesn't stop us laughing at it. It doesn't stop us having an opinion on what's going on.
Yeah.
And it certainly will not stop us reflecting what you think.
Weekdays from 6 to 9:30 on GB News.
My name is Andrew Doyle. Join me every Sunday evening at 7 p.m. for Free Speech Nation. This is a show where we address current affairs and news stories of the week with the help of two wonderful comedian panellists. I brought in comics because I want to give it a lighter edge, and also they work for less. See you there.
Join me, Mark White, here on GB News. For more than 2 decades, I've been at the sharp end of reporting crime and security at home and abroad. From the scourge of terrorism to the fight against violent crime and the deepening small boats crisis in the Channel, they're issues you rightly care about, and so do I. As GB News Home and Security Editor, my focus will be on the stories that matter to you.
Good morning and welcome back to The Political Correction. World number 1 Novak Djokovic is still being held in a detention centre after being denied entry to Australia to defend his Grand Slam title. His case will be heard on Monday after he was granted a medical exemption to compete in the tournament, but was still denied entry to Australia after having his visa cancelled. Joining me now here in the studio is our very own Aidan McGee. Aidan, good morning. Thank you for joining us.
How are you doing, Deanna? Nice to see you.
I suppose first question is, can you just give us a bit of a sort of timeline of what happened and what we can expect to happen next?
I hope we've got about 20 minutes to
explain
it, but let's do it as quickly as possible. Novak Djokovic, world number 1, he's the master of the Australian Open. He's won it 9 times, he's going for 10. This, if he was to win this Grand Slam, and it could still happen, of course, he goes to 21. That probably makes him undisputably the greatest player of all time, the greatest tennis player of all time. Now, he travels to Australia, having revealed on Tuesday on social media that he has been given a vaccine exemption. because he's an anti-vaxxer. He hasn't confirmed whether or not he's had the vaccine. I think we can assume that he hasn't. He goes there on the pretext of believing that his medical exemption applies because he tested positive on December the 16th. So he gets to Melbourne on Wednesday, I think it is, and Border Force officials tell him that having COVID in the recent past doesn't necessarily qualify you for an exemption. He says that's not right. Now, he's been granted this exemption by the state of Victoria, who hosts the tournament, and of course Tennis Australia. 2 independent medical panels have granted him the exemption. The federal law, so the federal government, central government, as we would understand it, have said that that doesn't apply. And so there seems to be a bit of disagreement over jurisdictional matters, OK? So now while it's all resolved and the hearing's on Monday, he has to spend time in a detention centre, which is a pretty ropey hotel. You think of the worst travelodge you can think of, somewhere in the suburbs of London, and it's 10 times worse than that. So I'm told he's had his wallet taken off him. He's recently been given back his laptop. He can't possibly practice. And as of today, there's been a bit of a development. The Australian government applied to have the hearing delayed by 48 hours. So it was going to happen on Monday, and now they want it to happen on Wednesday. Djokovic's team apparently are fine with that. It gives them more time to prepare. Don't forget, they've known they're going to court since last Thursday. But since then, there's been the weekend where there's no activity. So it would give them more time. I think it's probably counterproductive, actually, for Djokovic, and it's probably a good thing in totality that it's been rejected by the judge, because that takes us to January the 12th. That's if it's resolved that day. Could it go into a second day? That's 4 days before the tournament starts. This is a high-octane, highly demanding...
Not much time to get prepared.
No, not at all. He's up against Nadal. He's up against loads of other people who could potentially take that crown. He's at the top of the tree. They want to knock him down. This is high-level elite sport, and I don't think this is going to end well for Novak Djokovic. I think he's fighting a losing cause. I think he's there now. I don't believe he would have gone on the pretext of blagging his way in. It's not the sort of country you can blag into in terms of their immigration laws are quite strict. I think he was genuinely believed he was in there and he was going to be able to compete, but I don't see it ending well for him. I really don't.
Well, Paul, I want to bring you in because you've got a question for Aidan.
Yeah, I mean, Aidan, I guess really, do you think this has become more about the politics than the science in many respects? I mean, there has been, as you said, this obvious breakdown in communication between the federal government and Tennis Australia and the state of Victoria. But, the reality is, if he has had COVID, and with no reason to disbelieve him, back on December the 16th, then he's probably as less likely to pass it on at the moment as a player who's been vaccinated. And the chances of Novak Djokovic, transmitting it and that then leading to someone getting seriously injured or killed in Australia is obviously minimal. So do you think this is less about the science and more about the politics of government saying, look, we can't be seen to give an exemption to this guy, even if actually the chances of him doing any damage while he's here is pretty minuscule?
Yeah, I mean, he didn't help himself by having, or the pictures released in the last 24 hours or so of him going to a presentation where a new stamp was made in his honour back in his native Serbia. He was posing for pictures with children as well. That didn't help his case. I mean, it may be possible that on December the 16th, he may not have known at that time that he'd tested positive. Having said that, COVID is not an exact science. You can find 100 scientists to talk about COVID, and they might have about 4 or 5 different views between the pool of 100 that you select. In terms of the politics, though, yeah, I think you're absolutely right. I think he is being played. Scott Morrison, the Australian Prime Minister, said a couple of days before that he was happy with the exemptions that have been granted by the panel appointed by Tennis Australia and, of course, the state of Victoria. And then suddenly there's an about turn when he realises that the population of Australia, who've been subjected to some of the most draconian COVID restrictions known all across the world, when he sees an outcry from that, suddenly there's an about turn, and it's right, OK, let's chase this rich bloke who's worth $150 million US and try and track him down and try and stop him entering the country and make an example of him. So, yeah, I think there's politics in play. We saw with the migrant crisis closer to home here back in November that politics is crucial and elections are crucial. Macron has an election coming up, and guess what? Scott Morrison also has an election coming up, a federal election in March. I would not be surprised, Paul, if politics was right at the heart of this, and certainly a lot of people would agree with you.
Well, send us your views. What do you think? Should Djokovic be let in? Should he be able to play in the Open? Drop us an email. But stay with us, because coming up, we have a very special tribute to Jack Dromey MP, who passed away on Friday. Don't go anywhere.
Hello, I'm Olivia Guthrie. These are the latest headlines. The Education Secretary has become the first government minister to back reducing the isolation period from 7 to 5 days. Nadeem Zahawi thinks it would help teaching staff shortages, but says he'll be led by the UK Health Security Agency. Mr Zahawi is also insisting lateral flow tests will remain free following reports they could be limited to high-risk settings. Scotland's First Minister Nicola Sturgeon and the Labour Party had criticised the move as wrong-headed. Meanwhile, the UK has reached a total COVID-related death toll of more than 150,000 since the pandemic began. The Australian government has failed its bid to delay Novak Djokovic's appeal against deportation over his COVID vaccination status. It wanted to postpone the hearing, happening tomorrow, until after the Australian Open draw is finalised. Player Renata Voráčová from the Czech Republic has now left the country after having her visa cancelled. And the Duchess of Cambridge has released 3 new portraits to mark turning 40 today. Fashion photographer Paolo Reversi took the birthday pictures, which show Kate in a series of Alexander McQueen dresses with her hair flowing. She's also wearing a pair of earrings that once belonged to her mother-in-law, Diana, Princess of Wales. It's 11:30. You're up to date. I'll have more on all today's main stories at the top of the hour.
Hello there, I'm Eamon.
And I'm Isabel.
And you're watching the GB News digital stream across the United Kingdom.
And around the world.
If you're here in the UK, you can also watch us on your TV screen. GB News is Freeview channel 236.
On Sky, we're channel 515.
626 on Virgin Media.
Just remember, you might need to retune your TV to watch the channel.
Yeah, and if you are doing that, find out more about retuning by going to gbnews.uk. Join my show Farage, 7 p.m. till 8 p.m. Monday through Thursday, and there you will get opinion, analysis, debate, and I'll cover stories that nobody else dares to touch. And then for the last 15 minutes, talking pints. We're over a drink. We have a civilised conversation with someone. We very often disagree, but we do it in a grown-up way. Come and join me on Farage.
I'm Dan Wootton. Join me Monday to Thursday from 9 to 11 for the feistiest and most fun news debate on TV, where free speech reigns. I'll bring you a sharp take on the day's biggest stories, bombshell newsmaker interviews, and A-list guests. And I guarantee you, no spin, no bias, no censorship, and no reason to go to bed. That's Dan Wootton tonight, Monday to Thursdays from 9 on GB News.
Hello there, I'm Eamon Holmes.
And I'm Isabel Webster.
And we hope you can join us for
Breakfast with Eamon.
And Isabel.
You make me laugh out loud, belly laugh.
Is that important first thing in the morning?
Yeah, absolutely.
And there's me trying to be deadly serious. News is a serious business.
Yeah, I have to rein you in sometimes.
Well, it doesn't stop us laughing at it. It doesn't stop us having an opinion on what's going on.
Yeah.
And it certainly will not stop us reflecting what you think.
Weekdays from 6 to 9:30 on GB News.
Good morning and welcome back to GB News. Now for one of my favourite features, today's Common Ground. Joining us is Rabbi Dr. Jonathan Romain from Maidenhead Synagogue. Good morning, Rabbi. How are you this morning?
Hello, fine. Bit chilly, but pleased to be with you.
Brilliant. So what's on your mind this week? What are the key things you want to talk to us about?
Well, I mean, one was the Colston statue, which really, really intrigued me because, normally I'd say it's very dangerous to criticise the jury's view because, they're in the room, they hear the evidence and you have to respect that. But bearing in mind that the whole episode was filmed on television, I think it is legitimate to have a view. And I have to say that I thought they got it wrong. And what they did is they confused sympathy with the cause, in other words, the cause of anti-slavery, which I guess we're all against, And they confuse that sympathy with the cause with condoning the methods of the protesters. In other words, tearing down a statue without getting any permission or civic authority. And yes, by all means, protest or have petitions or, write letters to the council. And if you feel the council isn't doing its job, then make it an election issue. And, but it just seemed a mistake to pull it down unilaterally, not just because it's wrong in itself, but because that then really sets a terrible precedent for anybody else to say, oh, I don't like this or that statue. And I know on a technical level, juries don't set precedents, and in law it's only if a judge gives a ruling that it's then a precedent, but that's being very technical. And most people will see this judgment and say, oh, it seems okay to take down statues, and that's fine in this particular case maybe, but then then you end up with a free-for-all, and one person's hero is another person's villain, and we've seen attacks on the cenotaph, we've seen attacks on Churchill's statue, and some people would say, well, that was outrageous. Well, not for the protesters. So I'm actually quite pleased that the Justice Secretary is going to be considering this for a review. Because of the message it sends, and because at the end of the day, we live or fall by the rule of law, and if it becomes a free-for-all, then we almost end up, and I don't want to compare it exactly, but we almost end up like the rioters in Capitol Hill in Washington, and we all agree how awful that was.
Yeah. Well, you spoke there about a free-for-all, and I understand you want to speak to us about a sort of acting free-for-all as well, with Maureen Lipman and whether non-Jewish actors should be able to play Jewish characters.
Yes, this has been an incredible sort of thespian spat, hasn't it? So big names in the acting world clashing over ideology. And it was sparked by Maureen Lipman getting cross, I suppose is the word, that Helen Mirren had got the role of the Israeli former Prime Minister Golda Meir. And Maureen Lipman, who's Jewish, said, Jewish roles should have Jewish actors, and Helen Mirren isn't. And I have to say, much as I, enjoy watching Maureen Lipman, I think the point of actors is to act. I mean, that's what they're paid for. You don't have to be a rapist to play a rapist. You don't have to be an orphan to play an orphan. And yes, it may be sensible to have an advisor who's been in that situation just to advise on technique or the nuance or whatever. But I think I wouldn't not insist that only a Jewish person can play somebody Jewish. There's that famous anecdote, isn't there? I think it's true, in fact, about Sir Laurence Olivier was playing with Dustin Hoffman, the theatre, and Dustin Hoffman is a method actor, and he was playing someone who I think was a runner and exhausted. And what he used to do immediately before the play, sort of run around the theatre a few times, so he arrived on stage sort of really panting and breathless. And after a few of these, Laurence Olivier got a bit cross and said, look, next time just try acting. However, I would say that Maureen Lipman does have a sort of point in that there are certain roles that maybe should be reserved. I mean, for instance, a disabled actor cannot play some roles, and therefore if there are disabled roles, then maybe it should be a disabled actor who plays them, simply because all other roles are sort of not open to them. So there are some special cases, but I wouldn't say this one applies.
And I know you want to talk to us about the Pope as well. What's going on with the Pope that's on your mind?
Well, yes, he says something every week, and in this particular case, he criticised people who have pets rather than children. Will only have one child and then have lots of animals on the grounds that it's easier and it's less demanding to control the pet than to control the child. I think the backdrop to that was that there is a falling population in Western Europe, and not the rest of the world, but certainly in Western Europe, and particularly in Italy. And actually, he has a sort of point, but I only partially agree for him, because, I wouldn't call people selfish who don't want to have children. You can be a very complete person and have a fulfilling life without children, and of course there are many people who are unable to, who would desperately love to. But actually, he has a point in the sense that there are also good reasons for having children. I think it's personally enriching. As a dad, I can say that, so I'm not just theorising. But also, frankly, from a simple economic point of view, you need to keep the population balance reasonably steady so that you have a workforce that can support perhaps those who are retired or elderly. And we know that the ratio is going the wrong way, and there's a smaller workforce having to support a much larger old age population, and that's not good for society. I suppose the thought that occurs to me is that, of course, there are other parts of the world where they are overpopulated, and there are many places where actually there are children who really don't have proper families to look after them. So maybe adoption is another possibility. And although some people balk at that because they want their own flesh and blood, but maybe adoption is really a good way of healing the world, providing a home for children, even if you don't want to have to go through the pregnancy and the early stages.
Well, the point earlier about pets being easier than children, I think the Pope definitely hasn't met my puppy. He's an absolute nightmare. Rabbi, thank you so much for joining us this morning, and we hope to have you on again very soon here on GB News. Now, tributes have been pouring in following the sudden death of the much-loved veteran Labour MP, Jack Dromey. Mr Dromey sadly passed away suddenly at home in his Birmingham constituency on Friday morning. His death is understood to have occurred from natural causes. Figures from right across the political spectrum have paid heartfelt tributes to the MP and sent their condolences to his wife of 40 years, fellow Labour MP and former Deputy Labour Party leader Harriet Harman, and their 3 children. His family released a statement saying he was a much-loved husband, father and grandfather and will be greatly missed. Mr Dromey had represented the constituency of Birmingham Erdington since 2010 and served as Shadow Minister for almost the entirety of his parliamentary career, most recently as the Shadow Minister for Immigration. His recent campaigns included calling for better protections for those in the retail sector and backing calls for free public transport for key workers. His political career was colourful and full of activity, with much of the MP's time dedicated to an array of causes close to his heart. As recently as Thursday this week, he partook in a Westminster Hall debate on Afghan refugees, calling for the nation to stand alongside those suffering as a result of the political situation in Afghanistan. He dedicated his life to standing up for working people, making a name for himself as a leading figure in the trade union movement, a cause he worked tirelessly for from the 1970s all the way up to his election to Parliament. So Keir Starmer said Mr Dromey lived his commitment to social justice every day and dedicated his life to standing up for working people. The Speaker, Sir Lindsay Hoyle, called him a great guy, and Prime Minister Boris Johnson said he was deeply saddened by Mr Dromey's death. Former Labour leader Ed Miliband said he was a heroic guy and fearless in the face of the most powerful and tireless in the pursuit of the causes that mattered. Flags flying at half-mast outside Parliament in his honour, and tributes from parliamentarians across the political divide continue to flow in. Jack will be greatly missed by us all, and we send all our love and condolences to Harriet, to their children, and to the whole family. Paul, this must have hit you because Jack was such a figure in the trade union movement.
He was a huge player in the trade union movement before he went into Parliament and maintained his links with the trade union movement actually for all of the years that he served as a member of Parliament. He was the deputy leader of the old Transport and General Workers Union, which back in its day was a huge union representing thousands of workers across Britain in all sorts of industries. And he was a union activist for pretty much all of his adult life. He played a very prominent role in a very pivotal industrial dispute in the late 1970s called the Grumwit Dispute, which some of our older viewers, I'm sure, will remember. And that particular dispute centred on a campaign by very poorly paid, mainly Asian women workers working for a company in the west of London. And they were denied union recognition Their conditions at work in the factory were awful, and the whole dispute went to the heart really of how we treat workers in the workplace. And Jack Dromey did then, as he always did, placed himself implacably on the side of the downtrodden and of ordinary workers against their more powerful opponents. And really, that was when I think he became. When he came into the public consciousness, and right throughout his life, he fought for people who didn't really have a voice. And you saw, as you mentioned, Deanna, most recently speaking out on behalf of Afghan refugees. That really was what he was about, fighting for social and economic justice for people who struggle to do it for themselves. And he will be very, very sorely missed.
Yeah. Arlene, it's always devastating, isn't it? But I think in times like this, you kind of do see the best of Parliament, with people actually showing that sort of cross-party support in these times of real sadness.
Yeah, and unfortunately, Deanna, we've had cause to talk about deceased members of Parliament over this past couple of months on a number of occasions. And Sir David Amess, of course, being the last one before Jack Dromey. And our hearts just go out to Harriet Harman, who just recently actually announced that she was stepping down from frontline politics in the future. And you just think to yourself, now her partner, her life's partner, has gone so suddenly out of her life, and how sad that is for her as she was making the decision to move away from politics and to take things perhaps more easy and to enjoy time with each other. And I think it's just incredibly sad for her. And of course, she was the more high profile in terms of the Labour Party, but clearly he has played, and Paul has outlined it, a great part in the trade union movement, and then came into Parliament just in 2010, but is very well known across the Labour movement, and he will be very sorely missed. Not just, and I thought it was very nice that actually one of the pensions ministers had a tweet out, Conservative pensions minister had a tweet out saying how much he worked with Jack Dromey as the shadow minister at the time. And, you know, sometimes people don't hear about that, the fact that so much work goes on behind the scenes together with people who are in opposition to each other, but actually work together for the common good. So I was really pleased to see that acknowledged when Jack Dromey's death was announced on Friday.
Absolutely. Well, our hearts really do go out to Harriet Harman and to the whole family. And if you're watching from home and you came across Jack and have any fond memories, then please do email them in. We'll pass them on. I'm sure Harriet and the family would be very, very pleased to hear that. Now, we're going to stick with the Labour Party because Labour say they would impose a windfall tax on North Sea oil and gas producers to fund measures to ease the cost of living squeeze. They say the measure will reduce the average household energy bill by £200. Producers will be forced to contribute £1.2 billion to help fund the proposals. Shadow Chancellor Rachel Reeves blamed ministers for creating a price crisis as they dither and delay instead of taking action. Paul, what have you made of how Labour have handled the kind of energy crisis, but particularly in this past week, you know, talking about things like VAT on energy bills and obviously this that we've just heard from Rachel Reeves? Do you think they're taking the right approach?
I do think it's the right approach. I mean, I think it is an approach in crisis for a lot of families. I mean, there are lots of families at the moment in fuel poverty with the prices of energy likely to rise even further. I think more families are going to be plunged into fuel poverty. And what we need now, I think, is something more than warm words from politicians. We actually need some action. So I think Rachel Reeves is doing the right thing. You know, a windfall tax, I think, is the right way to go about it. The North Sea oil and gas producers, I think, have got a moral obligation to make sure that we can protect families as the coming crisis approaches. And as important as it is, however, I would say we need to have a broader debate as well about energy security, because ultimately, as right as measures like this are, it doesn't solve the fact that going forward we do have a problem with energy security. Renewables are notoriously unreliable. We've closed down a number of our coal-fired power stations. Scotland recently just shut another nuclear power station. So, in many respects, these are sticking plasters. I mean, it's right to apply them, but we need a much broader debate about how we secure our own energy in the future. But yes, politicians cannot have their eye off the ball on this one. people are struggling to make ends meet as it is, and with higher gas bills and electric bills coming in the future, it's going to be even more difficult. So credit to Rachel Reeves for coming up with some ideas which I think are the right ones here.
Doesn't it seem a little bit odd, though, to actually tax the producers, which will surely make the overall prices go up, to then for the government to then kind of use that money to make it a little bit cheaper? I mean, it seems like a pretty complex way of doing it.
Well, I think, look, if these huge companies are making, as they often are, considerable profits, then I think it's right and proper that they contribute more in a situation where people at the other end of the scale are struggling. I mean, you know, with the greatest respect, big business and corporations will always say that any increased taxation will lead to a hit on their profits and they'll have to charge higher prices, etc. I mean, I remember when the minimum wage was introduced at the end of the 90s, employers said, well, there's going to be more costs on us and therefore, you know, we're going to have to raise prices, etc. And invariably it doesn't happen. I mean, one of the first things that the government did when it came in 97 was to levy a windfall tax then, and it was actually the right thing to do. And there were very few adverse implications from it. So there will be howls of anguish, as there often are, but no, I think it's the right thing to do, given the situation that millions of families are struggling to make ends meet, and more of them are likely to be plunged into fuel poverty in the coming weeks.
Well, you know me, Paul, you know I'm not a fan of taxes, so I was pretty staggered this week to hear the party that are actually calling for a VAT reduction on energy bills is the Labour Party. It seems absolutely bizarre, and I think for me it seems even stranger that during the referendum back in 2016, one of the key arguments that was made was that our energy bills could get cheaper because we could take away that VAT that's imposed by the EU. And some of the leading advocates of this argument were our very own Prime Minister Boris Johnson, and yet now it seems to be being ruled out. What do you think, Paul? I mean, there seems to be a lot of kind of pressure from the Conservative backbenchers particularly to kind of follow through on this referendum promise and also cut taxes to try and make people's bills a bit cheaper. Do you think that this is something that might happen?
I think it should happen for all of the reasons that I outlined a moment ago. And you're quite right. It was one of the things that campaigners on the Leave side, particularly Conservative campaigners, said we would be free to do outside of the European Union. And of course, we are free to do that. And in fact, some of those campaigners said it should be a top priority, and it hasn't happened yet. And it should happen. So, yes, I think those Conservative campaigners who are pushing for the cut on VAT on energy are doing the right thing. I mean, in terms of Labour's position, look, I mean, it depends where tax is targeted, really. I mean, if we're talking about targeting people who make huge profits and richer people in society in order to make sure that people at the other end of the scale can have a better quality of life and don't suffer the sort of poverty that many people have to suffer, then I think taxation is right. I think with VAT, arguably it's a regressive tax anyway, and by getting rid of it here on energy, I think we'll be giving people at the lower end of the scale more disposable income, which in the long run I think will be better for the economy. So to answer your question, yes, it's the right thing, and yes, the government should get on and do it.
Mm-hmm. And Arlene, what's your stance on this? Because to me, VAT is something that should be charged on goods that you might not necessarily need to purchase, whereas energy bills are an absolute necessity, aren't they? We can't go on without sort of heating and electricity.
Yeah, I do think there is a need for a short-term intervention in dealing with the cost of living crisis, which is currently coming over the hill at us. But I also think that in terms of energy policy, there needs to be a more realistic approach to energy policy. And it was interesting, Lord Frost has given an interview today about why he left the government. And one of the things he's saying is actually getting to net zero may appear for a lot of people to be very important, but actually security of supply is a key issue in all of this. And just on Friday, a nuclear plant in Scotland was closed down. And we've heard today from Rachel Reeves saying that we've too much reliance on gas from Russia. So we do need to have a very real conversation about energy supply, the security of that supply, as well as the cost of the energy, which of course is very important as well.
Yeah, and I think with, COP26 this year, I think sometimes it gets a bit lost. We focus so much on the net zero side of things without necessarily tying that into cost of living and what that might actually mean, the path to net zero, what that might mean for, the pound in people's pockets. So I certainly hope that as we move forward, we're going to do these green measures in the most kind of sensible, proportionate way, but whilst also realising that not everyone can afford to buy an electric car next week.
No, not everybody can afford it, but as well as that, we need to have a very meaningful conversation about nuclear. Because in France, they are having small-scale installations put up. I think Macron is putting about 6 new small-scale plants in place this year. I do understand Germany is closing the same number of nuclear plants down. So there's a whole conversation about the place of nuclear in our energy mix going forward. And actually, the big nuclear plants, I can understand why people are worried about those in terms of safety and financial risk. But if you have small-scale nuclear plants, then I think that is the way forward.
So a very quick one to finish on, which we've been getting loads of your views in on, is about these words and phrases that politicians use. I think we all have these phrases that we probably overuse, use a bit more than we should, that can be a little bit cliche. But when does that go from being a little bit repetitive into being completely irritating? Paul, over to you first. What are the things that politicians say that really wind you up?
There's one particular phrase which actually Tony Blair used to use quite a lot. He would say it's the right thing to do. The right thing to do, almost as if that's an objective analysis. Because you say it's the right thing to do, it must be the right thing to do. But often when politicians use that phrase, in my experience, it's absolutely the wrong thing to do. The thing that annoys me as much as anything is the kind of yah-boo things that politics do. You know, just the politicians do, just constantly criticising personalities on the other side and making debates very personal, rather than, as Tony Benn used to say, concentrating on the issue. So I'd like to see them do more than that, do more of that in the future, I think.
Come on, Arlene, what about you? What are the ones that really wind you up?
You know, I use a lot of phrases, so I am absolutely guilty of probably annoying a lot of people. I used to listen to myself and back from when I did interviews, and I'd hear myself saying, let me be clear. I want to be very clear about this issue. And so I think we all fall into a pattern when we're doing interviews, the little phrases that allow us thinking time that we just put into the interview, right. And that take up a bit of space. So I'm guilty. I hold my hand.
And I'm guilty too. I think my one is I'm always saying in my inbox, which is true, but it still annoys people. But anyway, that is it from us today. Thank you all for your comments and views throughout the morning. The Political Correction team will be back here next Sunday from 10 o'clock. But up next is Alistair, Stewart and friends, so don't go anywhere.
It's time to remind ourselves there's always another winter. Canary Islands sponsors the weather.
Well, let's have a look at the weather for you. And the UK is looking dry across southeast England, but elsewhere a mix of sunshine and showers. So let's have the details for you. And thicker cloud and rain will move into West Cornwall by midday. Elsewhere, remaining bright with sunshine and showers. Not as windy as yesterday, with highs around 9. A dry, bright and fresh morning across southeast England. Light winds, but with plenty of winter sunshine. Chilly with highs of 7. The cloudiest skies across Wales this morning will be in the west, with some showers here. Elsewhere, brighter with sunny spells. Bit of a chilly start, but then a bright morning across much of the Midlands, with plenty of sunny spells, but perhaps just the odd shower. It's a chilly day again, highs of 6 Celsius. Now moving on to northwest England, it's going to be cloudy and damp. Northeast England will be drier and brighter with sunny spells, perhaps a few light showers. Temperatures around 5 Celsius by lunchtime. A cold, frosty but sunny morning across northeast Scotland. Elsewhere, often cloudy with showers. Those showers falling as snow over the higher ground. Edinburgh largely cloudy with highs of 5. Fairly cloudy skies expected across Northern Ireland as well, with a scattering of showers. Some of those showers could be heavy at times. Top temperatures 7 Celsius, 45 Fahrenheit. For the rest of Sunday, rain will edge into the far west. Elsewhere, a scattering of showers are possible. And that's how your weather's shaping up.
Canary Islands sponsors the weather.
Hello there, I'm Eamon.
And I'm Isabel.
And you're watching the GB News digital stream across the United Kingdom.
And around the world. If
you're here in the UK, you can also watch us on your TV screen. GB News is Freeview channel 236.
On Sky, we're channel 515.
626 on Virgin Media.
Just remember, you might need to retune your TV to watch the channel.
Yeah, and if you are doing that, find out more about retuning by going to gbnews.uk. Join my show Farage, 7 p.m. till 8 p.m. Monday through Thursday, and there you will get opinion, analysis, debate, and I'll cover stories that nobody else dares to touch. And then for the last 15 minutes, talking pints over a drink